Well, it's been about 3 weeks since a federal eviction moratorium ended, and we thought this would be a good time to examine what has happened since then. Are evictions on the rise in Oklahoma? And what about the landlords who lost their income during the moratorium? That is the subject of this week's in-depth discussion with moderator Susan Cadeau and her guests.
Thank you, Rich. This is such a timely topic for us to dive into right now. And we have a great panel to help us take a closer look at all of these issues. I'd like to introduce them to you. We have Rebecca Nahura, who is a reporter with Oklahoma Watch. She's been following the story of rent assistance and eviction prevention for months. Then we have Diane Spencer, who's with Over Property Management for Southwest Home Rentals, specializing in single family home rentals. And then we have Dan Strahan, who is the executive director for the Homeless Alliance. Thanks to all of you for being with us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Great. Glad to be here. Rebecca, I want to begin with you as we take our first look at this. The U.S. National Moratorium on Evictions ended August 26 after the 6-3 Supreme Court vote. How many households were behind on rent? How many households did this affect in Oklahoma?
As of right now, an estimated 95,000 households are behind on rent statewide, with an estimated back rent of $187.5 million.
Dan, what kind of experiences have you heard from people? Are folks really impacted by this? Is this a big problem for the state?
So, it's kind of important to remember that Oklahoma had an eviction crisis before the pandemic. So we were, depending on how you count it, in the top 20 in the nation in terms of evictions. So the pandemic has made that problem worse. We have, as a state, in Oklahoma City and Oklahoma County, Cleveland County, Tulsa and Tulsa County, received CARES funding to address the rental crisis. And here in Oklahoma City, they set up a new group called Community Cares Partnership to pay rent. And as of a week and a half ago, they had gotten 27,495 applications for rental assistance. They paid out on 12,748 of them, and they're still processing about 14,000 of them. So, and that total expenditure so far is $52,691,000.
Would you call this a crisis, Dan?
It's not there yet, but with the moratorium ending on the 26th, we really expect things to really start picking up, on the eviction dockets next week and the week after. I mean, there could be just a tsunami of evictions filed.
Diane, I want to come to you next. As a landlord organization, this has had to be painful for those who own rental properties throughout the entire pandemic and quarantine. People not getting checks, they can't pay their rent. How has your organization been coping through all of this?
Fortunately, the pandemic at the beginning, I guess with all the uncertainty, it got some of our tenants that maybe had not been paying so timely to pay a little more timely. So at first things were better. We didn't experience too much trouble with payments. I think that part has gotten worse as the pandemic's gone on longer. But yes, it caused trouble, especially for my owners, my small owners that have the home that they live in and then maybe one rental. Well, they're struggling to pay 2 mortgages, taxes, insurance, repair costs. Those things continue whether you've got income coming from your tenant or not, unfortunately.
What is CCP?
Community Cares
the Community
Partnership.
Cares. Yes.
That's the one that's making all those rent payments out of CARES funds.
They received the majority. I want to say it was like $244 million of assistance to help people. The downside, though, right now, I guess you could say, is they temporarily had to close their applications. They closed them September 1st. They won't reopen until October 15th. But that's to catch up because, as Dan mentioned, they have thousands and thousands of applications awaiting approval. So that's kind of the situation they're in right now. But there's another rental assistance program based in Tulsa that helps 20 county area through Restore Hope. And their applications are still open. So if people need help in that area, that's still an option for them.
So am I hearing this right? Because when I'm around and we're talking with folks about this, just in a personal way, we're imagining people unable to pay rent. We're forgetting about the CARES money that helps them meet those monthly obligations. And then we're talking about the poor homeowners who are renting out the property. They're not getting any income and they can't pay their bills. Some people depend on that, especially, Diane, like you said, the smaller homeowners. It's a catch-22. No one's the bad guy here, right?
Right. It's unfortunate. And landlords end up most of the time in a bad light when they're just like the tenant. The only difference is the house is in their name rather than paying rent. They're making a mortgage payment. So the struggle is there for everyone. It's fortunately, I think Oklahoma had a lot more. Most of my tenants, when they would come in at the beginning of the pandemic, I would ask them, "Are you still working? Are you able to still work?" Fortunately, a lot of our tenants were in fields that are considered essential employees. So, a lot of my tenants were fortunate enough to still work and still be able to pay the rent.
Rebecca, have you learned about how the eviction process flows during your research? What happens when a homeowner files an eviction notice for a tenant?
Well, they have to have a written notice first. And I want to say is it a 48-hour process whenever they have to be summoned to court pretty much. And the biggest mistake that tenants make is just not showing up to court. They're not there to defend themselves. And that's an automatic eviction. But no one can be evicted without having a written notice first. And then the actual eviction has to be carried out by the sheriff's department.
Dan, what do you see in that process? Why don't some people show up? Is that just a few or is it most?
I think it's a lot. Don't show up for court because they don't have representation and they know they're going to go up against their landlord's lawyer. And I mean, after all, most of those evictions are for things like non-payment, and it's not like you can contest that. I did pay. So yeah, they won't go to court. Some of them will move out before the formal notice is even filed. And it's really regrettable because we have literally these hundreds of millions of dollars to provide rental assistance, and we could not only catch them up on back rent, but pay forward for up to 3 months if it's going to be a little while. Now, to Diane's point, we almost really should have called this program landlord assistance program, because it's making the tenant whole, but it's also making the landlord whole so they can pay those bills. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, it wasn't really until last month that the feds who provide that money made it possible for a landlord to apply on their tenant's behalf. And so that hopefully will, because it's much easier to communicate with landlords all across the state than it is to communicate with every renter across the state.
Dan, you said we have this program, millions of dollars to assist, so it's too bad that folks don't answer a summons for eviction. Who is we? Where can they access this?
Okay, it's an Oklahoma Community Cares Partnership. It's a web-based application, so you have to be able to go online to complete the application, and it's
okccp.org.
There you go.
And Diane, is that what you were talking about earlier? It almost helps the tenant if you file eviction notice against them because then they qualify for help?
Yes, because as my tenants have come in to pay, those that were struggling, once I as a landlord realized this CCP program is out there, and Dan, I'm very interested in what you just mentioned because this is something I have not heard, that we as landlords can apply on behalf of our tenants. This information is not distributed widely enough. The problem, most of my tenants coming in didn't realize how that the CARES partners were there with the money. They had no idea. So they couldn't pay. They weren't making an attempt to pay. And they were just like not communicating with us because, for the same reasons they don't show up in court. They don't answer your phone calls. They won't open the door to you when you go try to see them if they're behind on rent sometimes. And once I would there was a couple, in fact, early on last September, two of my tenants I filed on. I felt terrible, but I had to do something. My property owners needed money. I It's, a catch 22. Filed on them. Both tenants were able to get their back rent paid, 3 months in advance paid, which helped them tremendously, and they were thankful in the end because they didn't realize that that was even possible. So, and there needs to be a better way to get this information out there faster. I mean, a community clearinghouse, like one central clearinghouse where everyone can go and make it clear to tenants and landlords alike that these programs are out there.
Community Care Partners does have something like that. They host these events called I want to say application stations for people who aren't tech savvy, because like you said, a lot of people just don't know that there's help out there.
Right.
And a lot of it's because it's online. And, some of the poorer people, they might not have access to the internet or be tech savvy or understand, how to go through that process. So, how does that help them? So these application stations are helpful for those who might need that face-to-face interaction.
Yeah.
But like you said, it needs to be more widespread. Like, how do we help these communities? How do we
and how are you letting people know that these application stations, because if I knew, I could tell my tenants and spread the word and get them help, because it's not, as a landlord, I don't want to evict tenants. That's not my goal. I want to help them, keep them in there, figure out a way to get their payments made for them.
That was something I wanted to ask you. It's not an easy process for the landlord either, right? I mean, what kind of goes with the fees and all that, right?
Oh gosh, yeah. You have the fee to the courthouse to file the case. You have the fee to the process server to serve the case. Then you have the time down at the courthouse for the eviction. Then you have to wait for the sheriff to do the lockout, and that's another payment. So it's costly, it's time consuming, and it doesn't, and in the end, you've got a family that's searching for somewhere else to live. They've got an eviction against their record now, which makes it harder. It's just, but at the same time, landlords tend to take a beating, and it seems we're usually the villains in the thing. People just don't stop and think that the owners, just because they have a rental doesn't mean that they are a person of means. They have, bills and stuff too. It's a hardship.
Dan, I saw you stroking your head at one point. I was like, oh, he's getting stressed out. What happens when someone goes through eviction and then they're out? Where do they go? What do they do?
Well, I do want to bring it back to this issue of communication, because it really has been a struggle. And
yes,
as often happens with federal programs that are put together in a hurry, there's no money in there for admin type expenses, right? It's all to pay rent and utilities and that kind of stuff. And so having an advertising budget, I mean, this should be on every other billboard in the county, that if you're behind on your rent, we can catch you up. And this is all you have to do. It's a pretty simple application.
Rebecca, who should be doing that? Who should be communicating this to everybody?
I mean, I would think the organizations would want to help, because they have to get rid of this money. It's not like they can just pocket it whenever, the expiration date, whenever that ends.
Yeah, spend it by a date certain.
Mm-hmm.
So, it can be really traumatizing. An eviction can be really traumatizing to the family, especially if there's young kids involved. It might involve, changing your school district and going to family or friends or somebody from the church to put you up for a little while until you can get back on your feet. And that's super challenging. And then Diane makes a really good point, is once you have an eviction on your record, a lot of landlords won't even look at you at that point, even now that you have a job and you have the deposit money and first month's rent and all that kind of stuff. You got an eviction on your record and they're just not interested. And especially in the Oklahoma City market, which is super tight on the rental market right now. It's 95% occupied. Landlords can afford to be picky at this point. And so if you have an eviction on your record, it can add months to the process of getting rehoused.
All three of you, I want to thank each of you for your time. What important information. I think we all just discovered together from one another, and hopefully for the viewers of Oklahoma News Report, this is great information to get out. I want to thank all of you for all you do to help everyone through these trying times. And thank you for joining us.
Thank you.